I'd like to welcome not only all of you, but also special guests that we have today. This is one of my very favorite days of the year to hear the National Urban Fellow presentations. And we have guests here from the National Urban Fellows Program, Dr. Miguel Garcia, who's the president and CEO of NUF, and Marlene Brito, who's the director of programs. Glad to have you with us this morning for another fabulous set of fellow presentations. And we also have some alums of the National Urban Fellows Program. Welcome back, Dante. Great to have you. We always love it when our alums and fellows come back again, so you come back anytime. And there will be others joining us during the day too. Before I forget, if any of you are available and interested in joining us in the PSM room today at lunch, we're going to have lunch. Bring your lunch up there and have cake to help celebrate Callie and Jeff's time with us this year and celebrate their accomplishments. So please join us in the PSM room at lunch if you're able to do that today. So why don't we get started talking a little bit about the National Urban Fellows Program. I know many of you who have been here for a number of years know about the National Urban Fellows Program because we've had fabulous fellows with us for many years. But this is actually the beginning of our 10th year with this program. And we've hosted 23 fellows through RWJF over the last 10 years. All terrific, fabulous fellows. And we've had this great experience this past year of having Callie and Jeff with us as well. For those of you who don't know, the National Urban Fellows Program are committed to preparing diverse and underrepresented leaders for top public and nonprofit leadership and service. I think that sounds a lot like what many of our programs do, our human capital programs, many of our other programs. The goal of the program is to develop accomplished and courageous professionals of all ethnic and racial backgrounds to be leaders and change agents in the public and nonprofit sectors with a strong commitment to social justice and equity. I think it sounds a lot like what it is that we are all about as well, and that's what this program does specifically. So today we're really lucky to hear from Callie and Jeff about their experience since last September here at Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Callie will be talking about her work first with the engagement group and then with the Band of 30, and she'll tell you a little bit more about that, and Jeff with the Disparities team. So to get us kicked off, I've asked first Fred Mann if he'll introduce Callie, and then Dwayne if he'll introduce Jeff's work. We'll hear from both of them and then ask them to come to the front and answer any questions that you might have. So let's start with Fred. Thank you.
Good morning. Ooh, very responsive. So before Deborah Perez made the big mistake of leaving the foundation, she and I ran this engagement group about strategic planning. And it was a very busy operation, and it went on for months and months and months. And Leah Lakshmana, who was one of last year's National Urban Fellows, really helped tremendously in pulling together the work we had to do, the lunch and learns, the kiosk things, the town halls, all the pieces. And so when Deborah was leaving, I was slightly panicked because suddenly I had to do all this work, and I was pretty cool with Deborah and Leah doing it. But I gave my friend Deborah a little going away present, and she called me about 3 or 4 days later, and she said, I'm giving you a present too. And I said, what? She said, another really good National Urban Fellow to come help with the engagement group. And that's where Callie came in. Callie Chamberlain has been great this year. She's been delightful to work with. If you have not had a chance to work with her, you've missed out. She is smart. She is funny. She soaks up information like a sponge. She's just involved in everything around here. I don't think half of our engagement activities would have come off as well without her. She got so involved in strategic planning stuff that she wrote her capstone about our strategic planning operation. And with Laura's great help on that, I think it's a big success, and you'll find out today. She's a very confident woman who has already worked at more places than I can name, and will go on to many more. So you're on, and thanks for being here.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I am so excited to be here to speak with all of you. It's a great honor. Thank you, Robin and Fred, for that incredible introduction. And thank you to Farrell and the staff, because I don't think you guys know this, but the AV system was completely down yesterday. And so we were thinking we would have to give this presentation in the PSM room upstairs. Although I am sorry to announce that after John Lumpkin and Farrell and James Mendez, they all offered to interpretive dance our presentations without the slides. So I'm sorry that we're all missing out on that, because I think that would have been great and memorable. Okay, so who do I want to be? Over the last 25 years, I have asked myself this question hundreds of times. And my responses have been exciting, surprising, and informative. They have continually pushed me to seek challenging experiences, change the way that I think, and put myself on new paths. Today, I am honored to share some of these experiences with you. I grew up in Minnesota, but of course, many of you already knew this because in between our snow days, you would joke that I forgot to leave the winter at home. My parents, after rounds of failed tests and procedures, were told that they would be unable to have children. So I was adopted from South Korea. About a year and a half later, my parents were in the process of adopting a little boy when they found out that they were pregnant with my sister, Caitlin. 4 years later, we welcomed my brother, Connor. Growing up, I spent a lot of time with my family, and I loved to use my imagination. My favorite thing to do was to stand on top of the slide in my backyard and perform to anyone and no one, as you can see here. Yeah, it was quite the ham. So my first response to who do I want to be was someone famous. I saw celebrities with the power and the influence to change things and to help people, and that intrigued me. And it's interesting now to consider that from such a young age, I would somehow already knew what I wanted. And over the years, this thought would fade, and it would clarify, but it would never cease to follow me, and I would always return. I went to college at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota. I graduated with degrees in marketing management and business communications, but I could have majored in internships. One of my mentors said to me, marketing and communications means something in lots of different sectors and fields, so I set out to try and understand what that looked like. And at the time of graduation, I had spent time at all of these organizations. Some of them I had done through structured, formal programs, and some of them I had done through persistence and luck. I would find people, I would email them, I would say, hey, what do you think about this? I have 10 hours, I would love to come work for you for free and just learn and assist with projects. But the same drive that pushed me to excel in my professional life, the same drive that was pushing me to excel in my professional life was beginning to impact me personally. I was having intense chest pain and a feeling like I was continually falling out of my body and into the floor because I was always pushing myself to do more and to be better and to do it faster. And that just got to be too much. It was overwhelming. And so with all of these health symptoms that I was having, I went to the doctor. And he thought I had a heart condition. Dr. Google, he knew that it was panic. And so I really had to stop and to prioritize and to take care of myself physically, mentally, and emotionally. I started to meditate, and I learned about the power of reflection and turning inward to make sense of the world and to let go of the things that didn't serve me anymore. And the response to who do I want to be had evolved to someone who can accept my best efforts. My junior year of college, I studied abroad in London, England. I could stand up here all day and tell you about where I went and what I did. And of course, I would only share the appropriate stories. But I won't do that. This photo can sum up my experience in Europe. It's a great metaphor. So I used to be terrified of heights. And when I say terrified, I mean that I would walk up a flight of stairs and I would turn around and look behind me and I would get nauseous. So being the logical person that I am, while I was in Switzerland on a weekend trip, I decided if there's any way I'm getting over this, it's by casually throwing myself out of a plane over the Swiss Alps. And so I signed up to do that. And as I was getting ready, the guy who had skydived right before me had landed safely. And he was walking over to me and he said, "God, you look really nervous." And I was like, no, I'm fine. I got this. And he's like, "Look, you can't control anything. You're along for the ride, so just go up there, relax, let go, and enjoy it." And that was a great metaphor for how I learned to think about my anxiety differently and think about my experience in London. And it's something that I continually come to reflect on. And even when it looked like this and like this, I loved every minute of my experience. So much so that the winter of my senior year, I studied abroad in India. India was powerful. It was transformative. It changed the way I thought about everything. And it did this largely by changing the way that I thought about myself. Because I learned through my experiences here how to accept where I came from and what I was so that I could more fully consider who I wanted to be. When I got to India, I had my palm read by this woman. And it was actually translated by this guy because she was speaking Indian. But she said to me, "You have incredible luck, and it's from the family God." And I thought, I have no idea what that means or who this is. And she must have read my mind too, because she quickly added, "The person that prays to the family God is someone that you have never met." So I had no idea what this was or what it meant, but I really started to think about what it could be. And a couple weeks later, I spent some time at an orphanage. When I arrived, the program director told us that the kids we would be interacting with would spend the rest of their lives in this room here. There was little chance that they would ever leave or have a life outside of these walls. It was the first time I had ever been surrounded by children who would spend the beginning of their lives the same way that I had. But our opportunities and our similarities would look completely different. I was given a chance by being adopted. It changed everything for me. And that stark contrast became very apparent to me. And so it's impossible to know if what the palm reader said is true. It's impossible to know if whether it was my biological mother that's praying to this family God, but I like to think that it is. And I like to think about how that was such a selfless act of love that, again, has given me every chance and every opportunity that I have. And that would make every difference in the way that my life would unfold. And it just reminded me how meaningful and important it is to do with something that, with the opportunities that I have, so that it's not just luck that creates opportunities for other people, but is more just systems and societies. And I was especially reminded of this when I returned home. After coming back from India, I returned to the schools that I worked at before I had left. Pre-India, things had been a little rough, but post-India, I was completely opened, and I was in a different headspace, and I was able to connect with my students in meaningful and important ways. And my response to who do I want to be had become someone who can do something meaningful, like this. And so, with that in mind, I graduated, and I didn't follow that. I joined United Health Group Optum, and I became a healthcare information technology and administrative consultant. And I had a lot of really wonderful opportunities to learn. I was put on a lot of great projects and a lot of opportunities to lead. I had some really fantastic mentors. But despite all of those things, something didn't feel right. And I didn't know what it was. I had everything that I was supposed to want. So what was it? And after all of this thinking and reflecting, I finally realized I didn't want more, I wanted to be more. And I had to follow that. I had to. So I made my first New Year's resolution and a commitment to myself to say yes. To whatever life put in front of me, I was gonna go for it. And that was a lot easier than thinking, change everything, but that's what I would eventually end up doing. And to make way for these opportunities that I would be saying yes to, I turned to Google once again, and I came across National Urban Fellows. National Urban Fellows develops accomplished and courageous professionals of all ethnic and racial backgrounds, particularly people of color and women, to be leaders and change agents in the public and nonprofit sectors with a strong commitment to social justice and equity. A few months later, this airplane became my home. I was based in California, but I was tapped for a case study in California. I was one of 70 consultants that was selected to go to Sutter Health hospitals and work to turn their network of providers into a payer. This meant working with the Department of Managed Healthcare, establishing contracts and networks and operationalizing those, and making sense of the ACA and the health benefit exchanges as they evolved. And I got accepted to National Urban Fellows. And I was a little intimidated at the prospect of saying yes and having that become real. But ultimately, I knew that I had to follow the feeling that I had, and I had to follow my fear. I had to go there and go to the other side and see what was there just to find out if it was what I really wanted. And so I did. I left everything, and I moved to New York, and I lived off of my friend's couch. And despite her telling me about how she was robbed at gunpoint in the lobby of the apartment that I would be living in, I loved every minute of my experience. And the response to who do I want to be, I was thinking about this one day on the train to class. And for the first time, without hesitation, my response was, if I could be anyone, I would still choose to be me. And I would want to be here, and I would want to be doing this. Throughout our fellowship, we're told to trust the process. We're told that every fellow ends up exactly where they need to be to learn whatever it is that they need to learn. When I got to the foundation, you were questioning your identity too. Throughout the strategic planning process, you were wondering, who do I want to be? And that overlap between the way I thought about it and you thought about it was so similar. And so I wanted to look into that a little bit more. I began to read The Fifth Discipline by Peter Senge. I was working on the engagement group with Marjorie and Fred, and I began working with David Waldman to look at how all of these concepts could come together. And so I based my capstone on learning organizations. In learning organizations, people continually expand their capacity to create the results they truly desire, nurture new and expansive patterns of thinking, set collective aspiration free, and continually learn to see the whole together. So I asked, to what extent is the foundation a learning organization throughout the strategic planning process? I looked at different learning definitions. Some of these we discussed in the Unjournal Club. Organizational definitions such as inside out and outside in, and personal definitions such as exploratory and strategic. I looked at learning accelerators and evaluated the organizational change theories and individual change theories. I also looked at learning organizations and evaluated the 5 disciplines. I saw how they were evolving here and at other organizations. The 5 disciplines are, first, shared vision. This is a commitment to pursuing something meaningful together as one. Personal mastery. This is your self-awareness. It's the way that you think about who you are and the way that you see your behavior impacting other people. The third is mental models. This is your assumptions, your beliefs, your mindset. It's everything. It's the way you see the world. Team learning. This is your thinking together. It's when you share your experiences and your perspectives and your insights. And finally, systems thinking. This is the way all of the other disciplines come together. It's a pattern. It's the interrelationships. It's how everything works. And so based on my time with the strategic engagement group in the Band of 30, which looks at the foundation's culture, based on my time here, my research, my reading, and my conversations with some of you, I've come up with 4 recommendations for the foundation. The first is return to the shared vision. You all have a collective dedication to the mission of RWJF, and now you have a vision too for creating a culture of health. So work together to define what that means and see yourself as part of that vision and come back to it, because in times of ambiguity, it creates purpose and cohesion. 2, make time to step away. This culture of health is an ambitious goal, and it's dependent on your ability to learn and to create. But your ability to create and to learn is dependent on oscillation periods of work and rest. Peter Senge says, "The flow of work and rest help us to manage change relationships sensitively, be willing to have our own beliefs and values challenged, and ensure our change interactions and behaviors are authentic, congruent, and principled." Recently, the Band of 30 and the Strategic Engagement Group have come together. So if you have any suggestions or thoughts about this, bombard David and Fred. Third, define risk. Risk-taking is essential for success. And just like learning, it has lots of definitions. So work together to define what it means for the foundation. And in defining it, you'll understand when it is and is not appropriate to exercise. And share your experimentation, because it should be celebrated. It takes courage to try new things, and nobody gets ahead without it. But I realize to feel comfortable doing this, you want to feel like it's valued and supported and encouraged. This should come from foundation leadership. In some of the things that I looked at, I saw that the Kellogg Foundation has the Glorious Failure Award. So perhaps that's something that can be implemented here. And I'm not insinuating that you're gonna fail, but I'm just saying on the way to trying new things and encouraging that behavior. And finally, refocus your mental models. Again, your mental models are the way that you see the world. They're the culmination of your personal and professional experiences. So as you work to define new ways of thinking together and collaborating, rethink the systems and the processes that you have in place and challenge the way that you see those. I once heard that every system functions exactly the way it was designed to function. So reevaluate how these are set up and switch them so that they can support the new norms you hope to cultivate. And so I don't want you to walk away feeling like, okay, these recommendations are huge, and they're on that institutional level. But each one of you make up this foundation and this organization, and it's also dependent on you to take some of these things and make them yours so that you can accelerate the learning of the organization. So I've come up with 6 recommendations that you can do personally today. The first is invite yourself to a meeting or speak up. This can mean popping into another team meeting or having the courage to voice your opinion. 2, talk to someone you don't normally talk to. Strong bonds create an inclusive culture. And 3, ask more questions. This can mean asking for clarity or context or what all of those acronyms mean. 4, consider alternative ways to connect. Step away from your technology. This can mean walking down the hall to ask someone a question or canceling your standing meetings to institute office hours instead. 5, think about where someone else is coming from. The way that you see a situation is one interpretation of what's happening, so challenge yourself to think of another. 6, take time for yourself, whatever this might mean for you. 7 and 8, I have left as a choose your own adventure. So fill those with whatever it is that you need to make sure that you can have a happy, a healthy, and a balanced learning journey. And finally, I look to you to make my recommendations. I hope to relocate to New York or Washington, D.C. after this fellowship ends. I'm interested in continuing the work I've done here on learning and change management, specifically the themes of connecting people, building trust, Identifying and challenging the way that we think and fostering stronger collaboration is interesting to me. And I'd like to see how these are applicable in international development, human and women's rights, and bullying. If you have any suggestions, I am open, I'm all ears, and I would love to hear. My immediate next steps. This slide used to be a Thelma and Louise of like the car going off the ledge, but I didn't want you to think that that's what my next step was. But my immediate next step, I know a little something about. So my professor said the most American thing you can do is take a road trip across the United States. And during one of my one-on-ones with Thomas Getz, he said, yeah, and you know what I did is I ate my way across the United States. And I thought, God, that's a great idea. And I'm not gonna say that that would make my trip more American because I know how childhood obesity and the foundation feels about that. But I will be doing this after I graduate with a couple other National Urban Fellows. While I was in New Jersey, I was selected to become a New Leaders Council New Jersey Fellow. So I spent my weekends learning about politics and government, and I began working with Minnesota Senator Terry Bonoff to create an intergenerational storytelling initiative. I will continue this work after I leave here. And although by and large, I don't know where I'll be or what I'll be doing, I kind of like that. Because a year ago, I was not in the headspace to see National Urban Fellows or being at the foundation as an option for me. I just wasn't there. And so in that respect, I hope I never know. I hope I'm always on the cusp of something that I can't see from where I am. And besides, being here has really clarified for me that continually asking the question, who do I want to be, is what's most important. That's the most important type of success I'll ever have, regardless of where I end up or what I end up doing. And so I would like to say thank you. I know this isn't Leia's interpretive dance, but thank you. Thank you all for making this experience so wonderful for me. Thank you for opening up your home and for helping me feel like it was mine too. This experience has been so transformative for me, and I hope in sharing some of my story and my path to here that it shows you just how important it was to me and how meaningful it is to my growth personally and professionally. Specifically, I would like to thank Risa and Robin. Thank you for inviting us here and having us. It was fantastic. I would like to thank Fred and David for being amazing mentors and friends. You've really taught me new ways to think about leadership and connecting and how important that is. Laura, you are so great, and I love spending time with you, and thank you for helping me with my capstone. I really appreciate that. And thank you to the Band of 30 and the engagement group. You guys are great too. And of course, to National Urban Fellows, Miguel and Marlene and Baruch College, thank you. That reference to Thelma and Louise, that was all Jeff. What I mean is, I didn't own a TV for 7 years, so I was completely out of touch with all normal pop culture types of things. So thank you for bringing this to me, and thank you for sharing this experience. And although my family's not here, I could not have done it without their love and support, so I would like to thank them as well. And before I go, I would just like to leave you with this. I don't know where I'm going, but I promise it won't be boring. In times of transition, I always come back to this quote. So I hope that we can all remember this as we go forward on our learning journeys, individually and collectively. Thank you.
Very nice, very nice. It's a pleasure to be able to present Jeff Moy to you today, but I want to take us back in time, maybe about 18 months or so, maybe longer. It's hard to recall when our strategic thinking process began and all the steps that we took to get to where we are now, all committed and dedicated to creating a culture of health in America, which is a beautiful vision to have. As a part of that process, though, this staff, our expert consultants from the outside, advisors and others, all said that it was very important that we take on this issue of health disparities and that we look at this issue and act on it in a way that's a little bit more coordinated, a little bit more cohesive, and have a name for ourselves going forward. Following the July 2013 board meeting, Risa and Robin sat with me and said, we'd like to know if you'd be interested in helping to create a strategy for solving health disparities in America. I said, that's huge. How does one go about doing that? These problems have been embedded for a very long period of time, and they said, well, we have some folks that we think can help you, and they picked some great people off the staff to work with. And I said, okay, that's good. You know, I have this childhood obesity team there. They said, well, you still have that too. And I said, okay. And they said, but don't worry, help is on the way. We have a wonderful gentleman who is going to come in here as a National Urban Fellow to work with you on this process and to be a part of all of that. And they passed me Jeff Moy's information. We quickly got on the telephone together. We talked. It was a very good conversation. Jeff has a very low internet presence, so there was no way to find out anything about him other than talking to him directly. And that was July of 2013, and we planned our first meeting of the Disparities Work Group in August, but we were certain that we were not going to meet before Jeff came in. We wanted him to be a part of this work all the way through. What you may not know about Jeff, if you could find out anything about him on the internet, it would be that he is a graduate of the University of Southern California with degrees in psychology and philosophy. He worked for Merrill Lynch for a period of time before coming to work here. And then you might say, okay, well, what makes him desirable for working on a disparities team? Jeff found his social consciousness a long time ago, but in 2008, he went to work at the Organization for Chinese Americans to help in leadership development, program implementation, and networking skills, all very relevant to our work in health disparities. Jeff also is a member of the Japanese American Citizens League, which is a civil rights organization nearly as old as the NAACP. Much of the work of the NAACP and the Japanese American Citizens League took place in the early 1920s and 1930s to help secure rights for colored people across the country. Jeff sits on their local board in Washington, D.C., and also on their national board as well, which let us know that he is seen as a leader by the membership of his organization and by the elders and the other leaders within his organization, which makes him perfect for working on our health disparities team. Jeff, when we talked on the phone, you told me, you said, well, you know, I don't know anything about health. And so how is this going to work out? I said, don't worry, it'll be fine. We will orient you appropriately, and many of us bestowed him with lots of books when he arrived. He was getting 2 or 3 books a week, but to bring him up to speed. And I can tell you he's a quick study, he's a dedicated professional, he's a committed individual, and what made him very perfect for working on the health disparities team is he always brought us back to including the voices of those that we wanted to serve, to make certain that as our strategy was developed that we did not leave out those who are the intended beneficiaries, and to make certain that they were part of the solution generating process. Kept bringing us back to that, Jeff, in your time here, you've done great things to help enhance our strategy, our development. I've enjoyed our relationship completely and thoroughly, and I look forward to our future together, but I'm glad to have been on this journey with you all. And if there's one more reason why Jeff is perfect for this work, you'll see it in this presentation. Jeff Moy.
Well, thank you, Dwayne, for that kind introduction. I really appreciate it. When I first got to the foundation last fall, one of the first people I met with was Marjorie, and she recommended that I watch a TED Talk by Brian Stevenson, who's the executive director of the Equal Justice Initiative. And ever since I watched that TED Talk, I've been obsessed with this quote. There is power in identity. When we create the right kind of identity, we can say things to the world around us that they don't actually believe make sense. We can get them to do things that they don't think they can do. I hope in the course of my presentation, you all can start to understand my identity and the effect that this program has had on understanding myself. I grew up in Maryland, born and raised in Annapolis, and then high school in Baltimore County. But there was something strange about growing up in Maryland, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first. But what I quickly began to realize is that outside of my parents and I rarely saw anyone Asian. And as I went through school from kindergarten through 12th grade, there was never more than 1 or 2 Asian students in the classroom. And since I know how data-driven we are here at the Foundation, I thought I would share some census data to back this up. So the 2012 census says that the Asian population of the US is 5.1%. That's not including Pacific Islanders or those of mixed race. So Maryland is actually a little higher than the national average with 6%. But Anne Arundel County, where I grew up, is only 3.7%, and my hometown is only 2.1%. And again, this is 2012 data, right? So when I was growing up, I can assure you these numbers were much, much smaller. And I would go with my family to visit, relatives, mostly in the Los Angeles area and some in Hawaii as well. And I would come back to Maryland and I would wonder, where are all the Asians? So, and I would, and it would bother me, to be honest with you. It was a very strange thing, and it was something that was always pointed out to me. People would ask me, what are you? Where are you from? No, where are you really from? And it always nagged at me, but I didn't really have a solution as a young child. I felt like this is just something that I'm gonna have to deal with and figure out how to live with. So one day in 7th grade, I was coming home from school, and my mother, as usual, was interrogating me about my classes. And we happened to be learning about World War II in history. And I was telling her how we were learning about the concentration camps in Nazi Germany. And she said to me, well, are they teaching you about the Japanese-American internment camps in the US during World War II? And I was stunned. They weren't teaching us about that. I had no idea at all what she was talking about. And so she told me, well, you better talk to your grandmother. So I did, and I've talked to my grandmother many, many times since then. And unfortunately, because of the deep shame that she feels from this time in her life, she very rarely tells me much of anything. But what I have learned has been quite shocking. Shocking to realize that the Santa Anita racetrack, which is in Pasadena, California, 15 minutes away from where my grandmother lives today, was actually a temporary detention center that she lived in for a week while they were setting up the more permanent concentration camps. In the dirt, in the stables, is where she lived for that week of her life. And after that as a small child, just trying to imagine her and her family being forcibly moved to Heart Mountain, Wyoming, really the middle of nowhere, with only what they could carry with them for 3 years of their lives and losing everything else that they left behind. I was obviously aware of a lot of great injustices that have happened in this country, but to hear about this just made it all so personal for me. And that was really the beginning, in many ways, of a journey for me, a journey to understand myself and to understand my commitment to social justice. But even sort of knowing about this, again, as a kid, I wasn't really sure what to do about it. So I would try to educate other people I went to school with about this period of history. But outside of talking to the handful of my peers who would listen to me, there wasn't much else of an avenue for me to go. So I went to college at the University of Southern California in LA. Much better than Stanford, right, Fred? And when I got there, I immediately noticed a difference in the demographics for what I was used to, right? In fact, what you'll know about USC is that it's 23% Asian. So a very big difference. And to be honest with you, it was incredibly intimidating for me, to go from an environment where I was the only Asian around to meeting other folks who were very active in the Asian Pacific Islander or API community and had been engaged for years in several different ways. I just felt like such an outsider. I didn't know how to connect with any of these folks. So I did a little bit of volunteer work, but for the most part, I really didn't engage in any meaningful way. And so, as Dwayne mentioned, I graduated from USC with degrees in psychology and philosophy. And, as anyone does with those two degrees, I moved to Washington, D.C., and I became a financial advisor for Merrill Lynch. So maybe a little bit more explanation might be warranted here. So my father is actually a financial advisor for Merrill Lynch, and it was sort of known that if I couldn't come up with some amazing idea of what career I wanted to pursue, I was going to try to follow in his footsteps and see if I could make that work. So I went to Merrill Lynch, and I started there in August of 2008. Does anybody know what happened right after that? That's right. So about a month after I started, the market collapsed. And Merrill Lynch, for better or for worse, was bought out by Bank of America. And I survived round after round of cuts somehow. And I ended up working at Merrill Lynch for a couple years, actually. And it was a very chaotic and stressful time. But what it made me realize is that I really need to find a job where I care very deeply about the work, where I'm passionate about it. And so it led me to really start, using my free time to explore other avenues. So, Dwayne sort of covered this as well, but the first thing I did while I was still at Merrill Lynch was start to get engaged with the Japanese American Citizens League. It's the oldest and largest API civil rights organization, founded in 1929. And, I rose up through the ranks, going through different boards, eventually being elected to their national board. And when I left Merrill Lynch after 2 years, I went to work for OCA, which was originally founded as the Organization of Chinese Americans in 1973. Now they just go by the acronym OCA because they work with all API communities. But these two organizations were very important in my development as well. And OCA is actually the second oldest and second largest API civil rights organization. So just to help you try to differentiate between these two groups a little bit more, when I was at JCL volunteering as a board member, I worked on mainly student leadership development, working with high school and college students. And I did a lot of speaking at events, and I usually looked something like that. And when I was at OCA as staff, I would go around the country doing workshops on professional leadership development, mainly working with young professionals, and I would look something like this. So maybe that's not very helpful to you all at all, but what is important to know is that for these 2-3 years that I was so deeply engaged with these organizations, I really started to develop that feeling of community, of really gaining my own network, my own family of people around the country who were, so invested in the same issues and had the same interests that I did. But at the same time, I started getting frustrated because unfortunately, a lot of these API organizations are very siloed. They don't tend to partner with each other very often, and they almost never reach out to other communities of color. And that was very difficult for me. So when I learned about the National Urban Fellows Program, it was a perfect opportunity. I was excited to have the chance to work with others representing their own communities, coming with their own different experiences and learning from them. And when I came here to work on health disparities, even though I didn't know it at first because I knew nothing about health, and frankly, I didn't really know what health disparities even meant, but coming here, it just seemed like such a natural fit. And to be able to work on these strategy recommendations as we were bringing them to the board has been such an incredible experience for me. I can't be thankful enough. So as we were doing the disparities work, there were really two main questions that I always kept coming back to. First of all, how can we build a network broad enough to be able to work on the social determinants of health, right? We're talking about everything here. We're talking about education and housing and income and these huge pervasive problems. And at the same time, the other question that always bugged at me was, how can we ensure that when we've built this vast network that we're still being inclusive of those who are affected the most. Knowing that this disparities work was so key to the culture of health, I was also inspired by this quote from Risa in her President's message. She wrote, "We know that building this vision of a culture of health will take time. It will take fortitude, it will take collaboration, and we certainly cannot do it alone. We must disrupt the status quo and catalyze a national movement," which is why I wrote my capstone about building a movement, and specifically how funders can engage in movement building. So when we think of social movements, we tend to think about the civil rights movement in the 1960s, right? Great leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. as well as Malcolm X. Being here at the foundation, we might also think about the childhood obesity movement, the tobacco control movement. And I guess inspired by John Gouveia, I did a lot of research into the farm workers movement for my capstone. And when you read about social movements, you discover that there are a lot of different frameworks out there for categorizing the different stages that a movement goes through. I use this 4-stage model created by the New World Foundation. So in the first stage of a movement, you build infrastructure. In other words, you put in place the organizations, the coalitions, the networks that are needed that will sustain the movement for years to come. And in the case of the farm workers movement, this was really when Cesar Chavez created, at first, the Farm Workers Association. He was filling a gap because many of the existing unions at the time were struggling to organize farm workers and laborers in California. The second stage of the movement is building identity and intention. And this is when you realize you're doing more than what you originally set out to do. You're part of a greater movement. And I think for many in the farm workers movement, it was understanding that with everything going on in the South with the civil rights movement, we're part of a larger social justice framework that's going on. We're not just a typical union. We're not just here to organize. We're building towards something greater for our people. The third stage of a movement is called social combustion. It's also known as the movement moment. And this is when you start seeing a series of victories, and they usually culminate in something great. And I think for the farm workers movement, this was actually when the FWA affiliated with the AFL-CIO and created this new organization called the United Farm Workers. And this is a picture here that symbolizes this affiliation, as well as representing the fact that Chavez was beginning to really work more with the Filipino community as well, represented by Larry Itliong in this picture. And finally, the fourth stage of the movement is consolidation or dissipation. Movements take time, they take many years and a lot of effort, and so at some point, inevitably, leadership moves on to other pursuits, or they become parts of existing organizations and the movement ends. So throughout my research, looking at different ways that funders have traditionally tried to build movements, I came up with 3 main recommendations, and they all take place during that first stage of a movement, building infrastructure. You may ask why I focused on the first stage, and there's actually 2 main reasons. First of all, this is exactly where we are as a foundation, right? We're right at the beginning of building a movement around a culture of health. And secondly, there's a lot of research out there that shows that building infrastructure in this stage is actually the best place for funders to be involved, because they can ensure that there's a very solid foundation in place for the movement to continue onwards. So my 3 recommendations for funding a movement would be focusing on networks, leadership development, and on long-term funding. So first, networks. Some of you may have listened in on Steve Waddell's talk earlier this year. And the thing I will emphasize about his theories is that of interorganizational networks. The idea here is that when you build a network, it's not about connecting different individuals. It's about connecting different organizations so that you can really gain from the scale and the greater impact that those organizations can have. In addition, his model is directly created in order to connect folks from different sectors as well as different levels. In other words, organizations that work in local communities, organizations that work at the regional level, and organizations that work at the national level. The other thing that I find really compelling about his model is that naturally, within these interorganizational networks, smaller subgroups arise. And these subgroups are ways for you to focus on either a particular subject area or a particular community. So in other words, if you're building an interorganizational network to support a culture of health, it would be very natural for a subgroup to pop up around childhood obesity or around access to care or around any of the specific topics that we're already looking at. The one thing that Waddell does not do in his book is explain how these subgroups could be set up. And so one possible option that I know many of you are already familiar with is that of the collective impact framework. So when looking at these subgroups, I would strongly suggest doing further research into collective impact to see how we can continue to utilize existing organizations and make sure that they're collaborating together in the most effective ways. The second recommendation is around leadership. And again, another area where obviously the foundation has a very strong background of funding in. Relevant to movements, there's two main points I'd like to make about leadership. The first is you want to make sure that you're creating space to convene leaders. And the second is that you want to make sure that you're training leaders and building a pipeline. So just to elaborate a little bit more there, convening leaders is very, very important in a movement because you need to make sure that everyone's on the same page as far as having the shared vision of the movement in mind. They can't be selfishly trying to plug their own organizations into the movement for their own benefit. They really need to buy in. And actually, I think we already have some great examples, again, of things that are going on. I did some research into CCHE, into Communities Creating Healthy Environments. They have a great gathering that allows their different leaders to come together and do some shared visioning. So things like that are going to be really helpful when you're trying to build movement leadership. And again, emphasizing the importance of having a pipeline of leaders. A movement is going to take time. It's a lot of work, and it's very hard work. And people, frankly, are going to burn out of leadership position from time to time. So it's going to be very important that someone's right there to take over when the time is needed. And finally, my third recommendation is around having a long-term view. You need to make sure that, again, the movement is not about funding for 1 or 2 years. It's about looking long-term and figuring out what you can do to best support these organizations and sustain them. So, core support is going to be really important here to make sure that you can build their infrastructure and capacity. It's also going to be very important to take a look at how you evaluate your programming around movements. And I think one great thing that we've got going on right now is the Voices for Healthy Kids evaluation. I think there are going to be some great pointers there that we can use for movement building as well. So in essence, I think these three themes, there's a lot of great work already going on in the foundation around these areas. It's just going to be important to truly build up this movement to continue emphasizing these points in our future work. So as I start to close out my presentation, I did want to pause and thank, really everyone here. I know everyone at the foundation has had some sort of impact on me, whether it's directly or indirectly, and I really appreciate the opportunity. Thanks a lot to the NUF staff and the NUF board. Miguel and Marlene, thanks so much for allowing me to be a part of the NUF family. Risa, thank you for your wonderful leadership during the strategic planning process. It's been really awe-inspiring to watch you work. Robin, thank you for always making the time for Callie and myself and always being a friendly face of the foundation for us to go to. Tina, thank you so much. I couldn't have finished my capstone without you. And probably only you know how true that is, but thank you so much for your support. And Dwayne, thank you for being an amazing mentor throughout this process, for really giving me the space to explore different avenues and to take the work where I was interested in taking it. Callie, you've been an amazing colleague and an amazing friend. And thank you for putting up with me these past 9 months living together. I'm sure it wasn't easy for you. And finally, thanks to my wonderful partner, Monica, for being so supportive and patient with me during this crazy, crazy journey. For what's next for me, obviously after finishing this program, taking a short vacation to Mexico, I'll be headed back to DC, and I'm not entirely sure what I'd want to do, so I'm open to any wonderful suggestions you all might have. But I do have a few last thoughts that I'd like to share with you about this journey. NUF has been everything I hoped for in a very practical sense. It's been this great resume builder. It's been, I'm going to get my master's. I've expanded my network in all of these wonderful ways. But it's also taught me some really, really important life lessons. Like to get sleep whenever I can. This was actually right after my first trip to the foundation last summer. So, it's important to get your beauty rest, right? It's also taught me to push myself in ways that I never imagined, like when I ran my first half marathon 2 weeks ago down in DC. And I think I've finally started to understand why this quote just won't get out of my head. It's funny, over the past couple years, I've done a lot of workshops on identity. I've talked to people about differences in generations because of acculturation. I've talked about breaking out of stereotypes like the model minority myth. But I've never really had a clear sense of who I was until I came here. I think being surrounded by all of you wonderful people, by working, frankly, with some of the most brilliant people I've ever worked with, by being pushed and challenged in these ways, has made me realize that I don't need to question who I am anymore. I'm a proud Asian American, a fourth generation Japanese American, fifth generation Chinese American, who fights for the rights of any disadvantaged communities. I'm an organizer, I'm an advocate, and I'm a leader. So as I started today with a quote, I'd like to end with a quote as well. By Yuri Kochiyama, this is one of my favorite quotes, and she's a wonderful civil rights activist. And the quote is, "Our ultimate objective in learning about anything is to try to create and develop a more just society." And that says everything you need to know about me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you both, Callie and Jeff, for another series of fabulous presentations from National Urban Fellows. And you gave thanks to all of us, and we'd like to give thanks to you for sharing your lives with us and your experiences over this last year as well. So thank you. We have a few minutes for questions, so let me open it up to the audience. Any questions that you'd like to ask of Callie and Jeff about their experiences, what they learned, where they're heading? Any tips you can give them for moving forward? Yes, Denise.
Thank you both for that awesome presentation. Borrow Brian's mic. What advice do you have for us in terms of hosting future fellows or future interns?
Well, I think one thing that would be great, and I know that these experiences change drastically from year to year, but there's so much to absorb when we get here, and there's so many different opportunities that to take on that it's frankly a little overwhelming at first to try to figure out what those things are. So I think just being mindful of that, and if there's any way to establish even a very generic list of, you may want to try to find someone who you can do a proposal review for. You may want to see if you can do a site visit somewhere. Just a list like that, I think, would be helpful in framing opportunities. And also, if there's like a list of these are typically conferences that come up in this time period, even if you don't have the exact dates, things like that, I think, would be really helpful.
Yeah, I would completely second that. And we can actually help pull some of that information together just to get a start. Because I think those experiences that we did have, like you're saying with the proposal reviews and site visits, those are really meaningful, and they give you, they gave me and Jeff a better sense of what the foundation does beyond what we were exposed to within our work groups. So I think that'd be great.
Wendy?
You were both fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm curious, I could tell by the way you were talking, you feel close to your cohort during National Urban Fellows. And I was wondering, what helped keep you close? What kind of technology do they use? How did you meet? I mean, you're all in different parts of the country. How is that so successful?
So the first summer that we are all together is very intense because we're in classes for like 13 hours some days. So you just bond by nature of that experience very quickly. But I think it's interesting to think about the experience. For me personally, I just think about the question again, who do I want to be? You're stripped of everything that you used to know and all of your safeties. So you're just sort of out there in this new place, working at a new, location, trying to understand who you are and what makes sense. And that makes you vulnerable in a way. And so you're able to connect with your cohort because you're the only ones who understand that same experience. So what we did is we set up like a buddy system. So we have accountability people that we'll check in with and just say, how are you doing? Like, don't forget that we have this assignment that's due. We have a Facebook group that we keep in touch with each other on. We send a lot of emails. And then this year we tried something new and we set up different regional calls so that people that were located near one another could talk and just share the struggles that they were going through and ask for help or words of wisdom. And then we had more collective calls so yeah, we had the regional calls and then all together we would have the phone calls as well.
Risa? Or Laura?
Callie, you were marvelous to work with on that capstone, but you came up with something from the Peter Senge and organizational change stuff that seemed to ring so true here. I don't want to put you on the spot, so you can say no, but can you tell the group here about the neutral zone and organizational change and the uncomfortableness there?
Yeah, of course. So thank you. So the organizational change theory, it has 3 phases. The first is ending, letting go, and sort of working through that grieving process. And Senge says it's really important for you to acknowledge what is being let go so that you can sort of have your moment with what's being left behind and move forward. The second zone is the neutral zone. And this is the time when you're sort of hanging in suspension because the things that you used to know are no longer there. And you know that things are supposed to be different, but you can't grasp onto what they are. So you're just sort of hanging. And that can be really frustrating and it can be really uncomfortable. And so the tendency that we have is to either run away from that and run back towards what we used to do, which is not effective, or to, what is the other thing? To just quickly evolve out of it and to just pretend like it's not happening, and that's not effective either. So throughout the neutral zone, it really is about taking time for yourself and reflecting and just staying in the discomfort because it's so necessary. And through that ambiguity, it creates so many opportunities to innovate and try new things because nothing is set in stone. And when everything is perfect, you can't make things the way that you would want to be if they're different. So this is your opportunity to do that now.
Thank you. Risa? You do.
Okay, well, I want to speak for all of us in giving a heartfelt thank you. I think your presentations were superb, just incredible. The way you talked about your personal journeys and connected it to the very real place that we are at the foundation. So we really do appreciate all the work that you've done this year and the way that you've helped us be better. And we really expect that you're going to come back and follow this journey with us. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.